Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 257 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renna. The show notes are located at continuefit.com. That's my site for all my resources. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about a really interesting article called ACL Surgery No Longer Needed? So that was really a good one that got us talking about a lot. There was a critique my forum thread called Potential Lumbar Flexion During Hip Hinge Patterns. Wanted to find out why Coach Boyle didn't really recommend any correctives on that. And his latest and greatest article, Genetics times Environment. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness, I'm on with Alan Cosgrove to talk about how do we know it's time to put in a juice or smoothie bar. A lot of people want to put those in, but there's like numbers that you want to make sure you have in place before you do that. For the Functional Movement System segment, Jenna Gourlay finishes her two-part series on using the FMS with groups. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty and Tim Robinson are on to talk about coaching and artificial intelligence. Will it take your job? Remember, check out trainheroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. For the BodyByBoyleOnline.com, hit the gym of the Strength Coach segment. I have on Kevin Carr, coach at MBSC, co-founder of Movement as Medicine, as well as the certified functional strength coach. Spoke to Kevin about his lecture, Full Spectrum Rehab, a client-centric approach to return to play. That was a really good one that we posted on Body by Boyle Online. We discussed the traditional model versus the client-centric model that he's proposing, what it takes not to have the lunatics run the asylum when you do that. We talked about biosocial and psychological factors we should be considering and how to manage all of that. A little bit of pain science. We talked about asking the right questions. And we finished up with an overview of his lecture, Brain Trainer, and why we need to understand all about the brain and long-term cognitive health. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. Remember, you can try it out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on the forum every day answering questions and putting up recommended articles and talking about all the things that are happening in the strength and conditioning world. We got some really cool stuff going on too. We've partnered with Adam Virgili. He's been doing some infographics that really kind of break down, make some of the research easy. And then we have a series by a guy named Dave Scott McDowell, and he's been doing this thing on using Excel to kind of like just all these tutorials, and we're up to about number 11 right now. We just posted number 11 today, so good stuff going on the site. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ian. How are you?
All right, I'm hanging in there, running around and trying to keep up with all of this kind of these, like the content that I was just talking about, making sure we're getting it out there with all the infographics and the Strength Coach tutorials and your Coach's Minute. Sometimes you get on a roll, like you've been on a roll lately with the no bad exercises.
I'm trying to keep things rolling myself. So it's interesting. A lot of balls in the air these days, especially with us starting up our summer program. So that's also a little bit more work. We
posted the programs on BodyByBoyleOnline.com yesterday, your summer programs, and we got a really good response because people were kind of waiting because all the staff meetings that we've been posting have been talking about the programs. You guys have been setting it up, and people were pretty excited about like getting those programs in their hands. So good stuff.
Yeah, it's always it's great. It's fun because it's always a little bit of a work in progress, which is also interesting.
I don't know if anybody noticed, but like I think yesterday you were like no bad exercises. Number, I don't know if this is 6 or 7. It was actually number 8.
And I know I looked back to change it. You noticed today, but
it's no big deal. But I think I posted a comment like, no, it's number 8. But Coach, I do want to talk about something pretty cool. Somebody posted an article on ACL surgery no longer needed, and it was pretty interesting article. And they were asking a doctor from Australia about some questions, and really it was coming down to basically this idea that there's a lot of recent literature reviews that have found similar outcomes in both non-surgical and surgical groups with respect to pain, symptoms, function, return to sport levels, quality of life, subsequent meniscal tear, and surgery rates. So it's a really interesting article about, like, do we really need this whole ACL reconstruction?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just looking, Charlie Weingroff and a couple other guys had just responded to that when you threw the thread up on Twitter. So I'd be interested to see if we get some longer responses, because I think it's interesting in terms of, it's hard to analyze a lot of this stuff without really reading the studies and saying, okay, what are they considering return to play? Are we talking about, NFL running backs, downhill skiers? Are we talking, mom and dad go back to softball? And so I'm not really sure without really diving deeper into the research to figure out what they're actually talking about. But it's pretty interesting to just the premise because, again, we've gone through kind of the hip thing. And I can remember, Gray saying, hey, people would do just as well with hips if they didn't have the surgery, but they actually stopped doing whatever they were doing for, 8 to 10 weeks and did the proper rehab. And I think it was interesting enough to, I guess, prompt further discussion. And this, one of the things that somebody told me one time is there's a lot of people that tell you a lot of things, and in the cancer world, people saying, oh, don't do chemotherapy, you can do alternative medicine, you can do this. And they said everybody who says that doesn't have cancer. And the person that does is like, I want to go to Dana-Farber, I want to go to, and I want to get the best care that I possibly can get. So I'd be really interested to see in this orthopedic world, what do the best knee surgeons in the world say? Not what does, and this is where you get into the research thing, not that what does one study say or a couple of studies that were maybe looking at the middle of the road or more average. But I'd like to see, and it's hard because, what a prominent orthopedist whose job is to reconstruct knees come out and say, you don't need your knee reconstructed. So there obviously is some level of, I don't know, if bias or self-interest or whatever it is. So it's just interesting because, again, we've seen baseball go with a very kind of non-surgical orientation towards shoulders. So is the knee that different? Is because it's this kind of crazy hinge? Does that mean, no, it really needs to be put back together the right way? I'm not sure, and I don't think I'd be ready to even venture an opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. It's funny. We have Kevin Carr on the podcast today, and Kevin, we were talking about his webinar that we put on Body by Boyle Online about basically returning to play, basically traditional versus the client-centric model that, and like our role and like, kind of expanding our role and to kind of really take a deeper dive into this. And I was telling him, and I'm obviously going to tell the story twice on one podcast, but I had a tear in my ankle, and I went to Josh Dines for a second opinion. He's like a pretty famous surgeon at Hospital Special Surgery. Basically, he told me, you know what, just go back to Charlie. I think Charlie can rehab it. It's not going to get any worse in 6 months. If it's still bad in 6 months, you can, I'll do surgery. But I'm a surgeon. I like to cut. But I'm telling you, we don't need to do it. First of all, we need more people like that. We need more guys like Josh Dines to basically, say, hey, go to rehab first. And then, but I will say, just from this idea about pain science, I was telling Kevin, I ran out of that place. Like, I was like skipping. I was limping in and I skipped out. And he didn't do anything except tell me I didn't need surgery. So I think there's so many other factors. And, we're going to go over that with Kevin as well. But I thought it was interesting in this article as well. The rehabilitation process is really similar to if they did have ACL reconstruction. And the time frames are obviously different because they're faster, because you don't need to recover from that surgery or to, you don't need a graft to monitor.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously, the part about the rehab being the same, yeah, I don't see why you would do the rehab any differently. That part I get. It's just when you think that you've got this kind of now inherently destabilized joint that you're going to be able to stabilize it enough just with your muscles to play. I start thinking about, when you see the majority female soccer player, okay, is a female soccer player going to be able to go back to playing high-level soccer without an ACL just based on rehab? Is a downhill skier, is an NFL running back? I guess I'd like to see those types of studies done with people at this high end of the spectrum, and that's what I don't know, and I really can't even comment because I haven't had a chance. I read the article, but you have to dig that next layer down and say, okay, I read the article, but now I need to look at the studies that the article is actually referencing, which I didn't do, and then start to see, okay, give me the finer points of this study in terms of who were the subjects, how many subjects were there. And because it's the same thing, I can remember reading one of the studies on hip, or not really studies, but one of the hip surgeons saying, we have 100% success rate, 100% of the people go back to play. And I was kind of like, well, that's okay. If 100% of the people go back to play, but how well do they play? So I think that's the flip side of the coin, is looking at it and saying, okay, if this person does in fact return to play, what is their level? And what are they expecting? Do you get a guy who was all pro as a running back who comes back and then makes the Pro Bowl again? Or do you get a guy who was a Premier League striker who comes back and plays in the Premier League and performs well again? That's the part I'm not so sure about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Lots to take in there. So, Coach, I thought a really interesting, I always love our Critique My Form forum. Always love this idea about people kind of posting some of their stuff. And somebody had said potential lumbar flexion during hip hinge patterns. And you showed a video, and basically, you had said you could live with what you were seeing. It was basically a guy who really, it seemed like he had a little bit of rounding in that lower back, and like right from the start. It didn't seem like it got any worse, although maybe it did at the very bottom. I'm not sure if it was. Maybe you could have put it up on blocks, but you didn't really seem to have like a lot of like, I don't know why. I guess my question is, why wouldn't you just kind of say, look, why don't you work on the pelvis, do some tilting, see if he even has that? You know what I mean? Like you felt like you still wanted to keep an eye on the back position, but I don't think you really offered much to kind of quote unquote correct it. Why not?
Because it didn't look that bad to me.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I kind of looked at that and I thought, if I saw that in the gym, I'd be like, okay, keep an eye on this guy. But I don't know if, I did say, like, if I looked at the thread, I hate to default back to the old, have you done an FMS thing? But I'd be curious. I'd like to see what his leg raise is and see, like, okay, are there some limits? Does something really jump out at you? But that was my only, as opposed to saying, so I guess it wasn't like, okay, don't worry about it. And it wasn't, oh my God, stop, he's going to kill himself.
Yeah.
And so it was more, hey, what is this, and it really, like, in that particular situation, obviously they always say, don't ever do partial FMS, you've got to do everything. But I'd really want to see what active straight leg raise looked like. And if someone said, oh my God, he's got a 45-degree leg raise, I'm like, okay, well then let's start working on that and see if that does in fact clean up some of what we're seeing.
Yeah, for me too, I'd probably do, there's a TP, the pelvic tilt test, standing pelvic tilt test that TPI does. I would have liked to seen that. Like, does he even have that ability to kind of anterior, posterior tilt? Does he have it there? And can he do it even on the floor? Could obviously stand it up on the floor and in quadruped, and then kind of just to check his pattern again with maybe like a dowel, and just trying to have him work on that pattern without any weight. But yeah, you're right. It didn't look that horrible too. I kind of had to watch it a couple times to be like, is he really nitpicking? Or yeah, I guess we should worry because if he's going to pick up.
That's how I felt. I was kind of like, no, I don't know. There wasn't really enough to make me, sometimes you can just look at something and be like, oh, I had a kid today in my group and it was like, whoa, stop. You know what I mean? There was no equivocation like, oh, do I like that? Do I not like that? Is that okay? It was like, oh, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And I think those are the easy ones. Nope, that's not okay. We got to work on that. And the other thing, sometimes I think, beyond the fact of, is there something wrong? I just sometimes wonder too, what's the level of teaching been? I think this guy said, and I'm not positive, but I think he said I have a new client. And I'm looking at the thread right now. I have a client I've been working with for a few months now. And so I guess I wouldn't consider that a new client. And I would look at that and think, hey, I guess sometimes the flip side of that, thinking about it now and you sort of probing more, is I might look at that and say, hey, if you don't like it, then don't do it. You're not saying I have a new client who's going into a powerlifting meet and who needs to deadlift. You just said I have a new client, and it's kind of like, okay, why am I, like you said, or maybe you just put it up on one block. Maybe you switch to high handle trap bar, because I'm pretty sure this guy was, I think it was a conventional stance barbell deadlift, if my memory serves me correctly, and it was. I just went and clicked on the video. So, and I don't know what equipment they have. Do they have access to a trap bar? I guess this is stuff that hopefully they're listening to the podcast too, because I'd like to get more feedback.
There you go. Coach, I love this article that you just posted, and it's called Genetics Times Environment, and it's really an idea that you were talking about from David Shank's book, The Genius in All of Us, which was basically your favorite out of all of the talent series books, which would be like Outliers, Talent Code, Talent is Overrated, basically what you were talking about is this key concept that differentiated what this was what he referred to as genetics times environment, and that success is not the result of superior genetics or superior environments, but instead is a result of multiplying the two. Can you just expand on, what you felt like you really liked about this?
Well, you'll appreciate this, because I get, and I haven't got there yet. That's why I finished up this article first. Colin Shields had sent me some video of Jack Hughes, who's going to be the first pick in the draft. Mm-hmm. And I think he had some parents saying, hey, I want my kid, now I want him to stick handle while he does the ladder, and I want to do, and it was kind of like there were some things that they saw in the video. And the interesting thing about the video clip was that they were at a training center in Canada somewhere, and they were doing strength training stuff. There was a lot of really good stuff, but there was also a lot of, what I would consider sports specific, and in this case, real hockey specific stuff that the kid was doing. And so I started thinking like, okay, I need to kind of talk about I started thinking about Alan's hierarchy of fat loss idea, and then thinking about, okay, what's the hierarchy sort of training success? And it's kind of like, if you have a parent who wants you to do stick handling in the ladder, but their kid's not in your strength program, then they're sort of filling the little buckets instead of filling the big bucket. And so and I'm probably rambling here, but in order to work back to that, it's hard. What I was getting at was, it's hard to look at Jack Hughes and think, oh, I want my kid to be like him. You're talking about a kid who's got great genetics. Both mom and dad were hockey players. I think the mom played at UNH and the dad played someplace else. His dad is a coach. He's at an incredible training center in Canada. So you've got almost the perfect genetics times environment picture, except that he's not really big. I think he's 5'10", 170. And somebody's looking at that picture and then saying, picking out like, oh, look, he stick handles while he's in the ladder. Or, you know what I mean? And thinking, that's what my kid needs to do to be like Jack Hughes. And you're like, actually not. In the genetics times environment thing, one, you can't change your kid's genetics, so you better change their environment. And if they're not in a really good training environment, then you need to get them in one. And you also need to figure out what's kind of square one. What's the first thing I have to cover? And the first thing you have to cover is the strength training piece. Because as I said, if you get a kid who's weak and not powerful, and then obviously isn't going to be a great skater, but he can, use a stick handling ball while he does ladder drills, you kind of fall into that, like, who cares category. So that was one of my classic, really long answers for sure.
Not really. I mean, I agree with you on that. It is interesting because I do love those books. Like the Talent Code and Outliers, et cetera. And I think they do spark a lot of interesting conversation with, just in general, like, what is it? Is it just hard work, or is it just genetics, or is it that combination of both? But I do like that formula. And, like you had said, though, the bad news is with this formula, if you're a 2 on the genetic scale, your potential might only be, 20. So if you're times in it by, the genetics times the environment, yeah, you can have a 10 on the environment out of a scale of 1 to 10. But if you only have a 2 on genetics, you're only at 20. Whereas a kid who has great genetics, like Hughes, or even a Greg Zegras, who's from my area, he's national team development center as well. I played hockey against his father, and his dad, Greg's dad, was the coach like for years at Rye High School. And so like this kid's got everything. He's got good genetics and that same environment. So that's the problem, is that if you don't have those good genetics, you might be, out of luck.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the part. And now I guess I was actually thinking about doing a whole Instagram series on that piece, because I think that's part of what people don't get in terms of, looking at it and thinking, much like, as I said, Alan's hierarchy of fat loss kind of thing, looking at it and saying, hey, wait a second, we need to figure out sort of what's the first big bucket that has to get filled, and don't hyper-focus on this little bucket over on the side and think, oh, that would, it's like, that one's labeled on the side, cool little bucket. And everybody's like, oh, I'm really focused on the cool little bucket. And then you've got big bucket on the left that says strength and power on it, and that friggin' thing's empty. And you're like, hey, you can spend all day filling cool little bucket over here to the right, but that in the big picture is not going to be what changes things for us.
Absolutely. I think the quote that summed it up in your article was, we can't change genetics. We can, however, create environments that encourage excellence. So I think that's the thing. Like you said, as parents, we, sometimes we think that, a better environment will produce the best results, and it will, but, you got to make sure that you got all those other things covered.
Exactly.
All right, Coach, that is going to do it for today. So thanks for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
Perfect. Thanks, Ian.
All right, guys, right now, Perform Better, they got free shipping on orders over $59. Make sure you take advantage of some of the sale items. You can double dip and get yourself a pretty good deal. Special financing. Remember, Perform Better has 0% interest for 36 months, no down payment, and no payment for 6 months. Great time to get some of that big equipment, to redo some things in your gym. Don't forget, Summit season is here. You can come see me in Providence. I'm speaking that Sunday morning. It's August 1st to the 4th in Providence, and I'll be doing my 7 things I learned from the best of the best. That's basically a take on some of the things I learned from my book project when my book's coming out in September. You can check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Today I got on Alan Cosgrove. Alan, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
All right. Well, I wanted to, obviously we're continuing doing this together because I feel like we all feel like it's working much better. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about, and we did this in a Strength Coach TV, I think it was episode 8, where we did a 2-part thing on Strength Coach TV. We visited Results Fitness, and then we talked about your smoothie bar because it was relatively new at the time. And I wanted to talk to you about, because we see a lot of people out there that actually ask this question, like, when is it time to add that smoothie bar? Like, how many members do you need? Because, it's a pretty big investment for the most part.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and, so we can't just have, 75, 80 members who were thinking, and also there's almost this idea, if you've already got them in this, let's say you did ready-made drinks, you've already got them in this idea of, hey, post-workout shakes are where it's at. You got to have them, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of setting it up for the smoothie bar as well. Also, what I wanted to ask you about was what kind of profit should we be looking for? Because I think a lot of people don't understand. They think, okay, if I sell a smoothie for, $6, the ingredients don't cost that much. I'm making, $5.50. No, it doesn't work like that. So I wanted to talk about profits and then maybe how long should they expect to pay off that initial investment and or should we just say, this is crazy, just get some ready-made and start doing that?
Well, I think that's the good question is the first part is the product at this point of thinking is irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter if it's a ready-made or if it's a cooler or if it's a smoothie bar where we're doing fresh fruit and things like that. The concept I want everybody to get is that at some level you have to have multiple income streams from your business. So a traditional gym, a big box gym, people join the gym and the gym makes money from this membership fee. And then the additional services are personal training, right? Or group training where they charge an additional fee for that. And then they have maybe clothing, supplements, smoothies, etc. Well, most of us in this realm, we're running training studios where our only income in the beginning is just the membership that includes training. So the first question is how can we generate an additional income stream, right? So it could be supplements, it could be protein shakes, it could be clothing, but that's the first part. Because the key thing here is there's only 3 ways to make money in business. One is to get more clients or customers, and everybody knows that. Number 2 is to get your existing clients to come in more often, so an extra training session a month, a week, whatever. And the third is to get your existing clients to spend more per visit. And that's actually the McDonald's idea of, would you like fries with that? If we can increase the transaction, it's why Starbucks starts selling food too. If you can increase the transaction, you can make more money. So that's the whole idea of this. I'm just talking from a business point of view. We can discuss post-workout nutrition and protein sources in another segment on the podcast. So this is just the business segment. I'm a huge believer in post-workout nutrition. When I started at a gym in New York that had a smoothie bar, and I just made my clients get a shake after it. And we always, from day one, had the ready-mades in the cooler. Now, I'm not going to tell you that a smoothie bar is cheap. It was a big expense for us. The biggest thing in California is it changes your health code. Now you get someone coming in checking, as you should, checking that it's clean, that the water's hot enough to wash the blenders and stuff. But it was a big expense to put it in, including the plumbing and the drainage. However, if you're getting, I would say the number I'd look for is 100 visits per day, right? So if you've got 50 members, I don't think you're ready for a juice bar yet, but I would definitely do a cooler drinks with some waters, maybe some energy drinks if that's your thing, some Gatorade, fluid replacement drinks, and some of the ready-made protein drinks. There's some good ones on the market now, but I like about 100 visits per day because you're looking for about a 50% purchase rate on the shakes. Now, if we look at profits, the cost of the actual raw ingredients on the shake might be like $1 or $2, and you can sell it for double that. But I've also got payroll for the person who makes it. I've also got storage. I've also got inventory. So you'll end up marking up stuff, somewhere between 75 to 100%, but that won't all be profit. There's other costs in that, marking up the raw ingredient and that. But our goal is it's about a 50% penetration rate. We're above that at results. Is we have during the session, because when a class gets out or a session ends, there's a rush at the front. We have one of our front desk team, because our smoothie bar's at the front desk, which saves us a little bit on payroll, because I can have one person working both sections. They'll do a tour of the gym and just ask people, hey, what shake are you getting today? So they can pre-order them. And we use the Starbucks model. We write their name on the shake and it's ready for them when they finish their workout. We're kind of simple with it. There's multiple options, but it really comes down to a protein powder with water or milk or almond milk with some type of fruit or some type of nut butter. right? So you can have a peanut butter chocolate shake, right, with chocolate almond milk or whatever. But it's just the ingredients are kind of simple. It just you can match a lot of people. But I'd look for there's different levels of it. You can put in like a little booth with one blender, and you can put in like we have with the whole area and the seating area. But I think for most people listening, you're looking for about 100 visits per day. I could make a case if you were getting 50 workouts a day that it's time to start it. But it is a big expense, and you've got to be able to play the long game. Right now, one of the cool things that I forget the name of the blender that we use a company called Performance Food Centers, and the blenders that they gave us we have one at home, it's a Blend Tech or something, and it has a number on it. Now the number on it is how many times this blender has been used, and the reason being is that they want you to use one blender all the time, one machine, and not use your two blenders equally, because there's a time when they're going to break, right? You don't want it to break at the same time. But that's been cool for me as a business owner, because I can tell you how many shakes have been made on each blender, right? So I can do math on that and tell you which one generated. But you're looking at I think you're looking at a year. If you go small, a year, you go bigger, 18 months or longer to break even on this, which for a lot of trainers that can be quite scary. But if you understand financing and loans, you can do some stuff like that so you don't actually using your own investment. But it is a longer game before you make money, because you're basically building something, and then the profits come in at $3 at a time, right? You're not going to sell 300 shakes on day one and make some money. But so the key thing I want everybody to get is there's only 3 ways to make money in your business, and this is more money per transaction. And one of the goals we set for our Results Fitness University affiliates is we like $5 additional in gym income per client visit. So if you get 1,000 visits a week, we're looking for an extra $5,000 a week. If you get 100 visits a week, we're looking at $500. So that's your target, and this helps you to do that.
Love it. Yeah, it's definitely, a big decision. And I think, people have to really understand some of the other things that are going to be involved. Like you said, permits and being part of the health code. I obviously worked in the restaurant business, so I always knew, you never know the health department's coming in. But there's a million other things to think about. So, Alan, thanks so much for doing this. Great information. And we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you, Ant. And check us out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Functional Movement System segment. My name is Jenna Gourlay, and today I would like to finish a 2-part series about how to screen and intervene with a team or a large group using the example of a collegiate volleyball team that I consulted with last year. In the last segment, we discussed how to physically implement the screen when you have multiple athletes or clients, and in this segment, we'll discuss what to do with the data once you've collected it. So to review, this volleyball team didn't have any pain with screening, but 12 of the 15 didn't pass rotary stability, 13 out of the 15 didn't pass trunk stability push-up, and 9 out of 15 did not pass the squat. Now, when I initially asked the strength coach what she was going to start with, she made one of the common mistakes that I see when people first start screening teams altogether. I asked where she thought that she would start for correctives based on the data alone, and she told me that she had already started the group on correctives for the squat. When I asked her why, she justified with the decision with the fact that she was trying to develop their vertical jump and that they needed the squat for both loading and for landing. Now, I get her thinking, but the performance goal has now led her away from the corrective algorithm of the screen. Most of her team lacks the fundamental patterns for rotary stability and for trunk stability push-up, which should be where she starts before going on to the squat. Now, she's right. Rotary stability and trunk stability push-up don't look like most of the movements in volleyball, but that's not what they're measuring. They're instead giving a window into the motor control that's necessary for everything that they do need to do in volleyball. These patterns are the foundation under that sport-specific performance and those skill metrics. Performance goals should not change the order of how we correct patterns. We wouldn't want to go after the squat first because we're missing the opportunity to intervene at a more fundamental level, which makes up the foundation of those more functional patterns. When the coach started with correcting rotary stability and trunk stability push-up first, she actually saw her players improve in the squat without spending any time working on it. So it's more effective and more advantageous from an efficiency standpoint to remove the more fundamental barriers first, because you often see a result in those more functional patterns. This is no different than, focusing on the functional movement screen in order to remove the barriers to training and thus see a performance benefit. The problem that I see is that most people don't fully trust the system, and because they don't trust the system, they try to take shortcuts. With so many of her players failing rotary stability and failing the trunk stability push-up, the volleyball coach wanted to excuse the players from, having to do it all together and go directly to the squat. Part of that comes from not being confident in the system, and part of that comes from not being confident in her own ability to make a change in all of her players. But like we said last time, you need to implement the full screen. What may take a little bit of time on the front end is made up on the back end. She could have continued trying to fix the squat in her players before rotary stability or trunk stability push-up, but it probably wouldn't have been as effective or as efficient. In the end, she only had to work on the squat pattern with 2 players after they had worked on rotary stability and trunk stability push-up. The rest were good when she retested it without even working on it. So when it comes to the correctives themselves, many coaches think that they want to implement more of a generic strategy as part of a warm-up. Now, while this is better than nothing, it's not the best way, because you'll have athletes spending time on correctives that they don't necessarily need. The best way is, of course, an individualized approach, but this can be difficult in large groups. So for this reason, implementing subgroups works really well. Instead, you'll group players based on, their problem areas, and you'll use the algorithm to dictate those subgroups. So for example, if someone failed the squat and only the squat, then of course they'll get squat correctives. But you wouldn't put someone that failed both inline lunge and rotary stability in that same group of the people that are working on the squat. They both need different things. Now, as the athletes improve, you can move them to a different subgroup. This is also a side benefit because as athletes improve in their group, it acts as an awesome motivator and a way to get buy-in from the other people in their group. Once you've achieved minimal movement competency, you can also then start to group them based on more of their capacity. Now, while group screening I know can be difficult and be harder than one-on-one, I'd argue that it's honestly more rewarding. If you do get overwhelmed, remember the important thing is that the functional movement system was developed based on principles. And these principles will help guide any situation regardless of how many athletes you have and no matter what your team goals are. That's it for today. My name is Jenna Gourlay, and this has been a functional movement system segment. For more information, please check out functionalmovement.com, and thanks for listening.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Coach Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Yes.
Today, you will all be assimilated.
Everybody, all y'all out there, everyone's.
All right. So, we have a blog post out right now talking about our new mobile onboarding feature.
Yeah.
And in it, I kind of, asked the question, hey, could a coach be replaced by a computer, by an AI?
That's scary, Adam.
And it's a hot topic, and there are a lot of jobs right now that are either being replaced or going to fundamentally change because of technology.
Sure.
And so, for coaching, and in that article, I kind of argue, well, if your job consists entirely of simply giving somebody reps and sets to do, right? Then I think you could probably, right? It doesn't even have to be artificial intelligence, probably, to do that well enough.
Right.
But if coaching, is really like a human endeavor.
Sure.
And you're doing things that are more intrinsically human, meaning you develop trust and rapport, and
totally.
you motivate people, and you have relationships, then that's going to be a lot harder to replace. And of course, you in-person coaches are going well, no, duh. I know this.
Much tougher for folks coaching across the country or across the world, right? Those remote folks.
Yeah, and so remote coaching is growing, and it's one thing we support at Train Heroic. So
sure.
It's something we consider, but that's not our goal at all. The goal is not to replace anybody. It's to facilitate. To increase someone's abilities.
Absolutely, and people ask all the time about creating the perfect system on the cloud or on the internet, and the system recognizing the programming, and that's not necessarily what we do. We do a little bit of that, but our job is to help coaches coach more folks better and make the journey super rewarding for the athletes. And we do use data and metrics and analytics to do that, but there's this is totally a human endeavor, right? You got to build relationships. You got to talk to folks. You got to adjust that programming as it moves forward. And I think some of the issue that folks have, and you hit the nail on the head, Adam, is trust, trusting the system, trusting that, data that's being put in will be spit out the right way.
Yeah, and so it comes down to still like there's the relationship between the human, the recipient of the information from some system, right?
Yes.
And so like if you look at other examples in the real world about where there are AIs or similar systems in place that humans have to interact with, like even if they're working perfectly, meaning like as intended, right? Because again, you wouldn't understand how the computer works necessarily.
Yeah, no.
Even if it is supposedly working, it's like people have issues trusting it. And you'll hear about this like in there was a city that had a water management system that had an AI that was basically watching, monitoring, and telling them what to do. And basically humans kept overriding it because they didn't know how it worked.
Yeah.
Right? Because one of these things like machine learning, which is part of a lot of this, is like you basically put in a bunch of variables, a bunch of data. And then it goes into this like black box. You can't see into it really, right?
Yeah.
And then it spits out like the answer.
Right.
And you're really like, if you're just like a consumer of the thing it spits out, and if it spits out something weird, you're like, that can't be right.
Yeah, exactly. And we lose that was a great example. Like data goes into a black box. You can't see what's really happening behind the sines. And then something comes out. And it's not necessarily that what the output or what comes out is wrong.
Yeah.
It's more of that, super high volume doesn't look like that's what I should be doing today because you're not familiar with it. And that makes you uncomfortable.
So there are a couple of companies out there right now who are offering like what are supposed to be like AI coaching, systems.
Sure.
And there's some apps in the App Store I've seen. I've been playing with some of those lately. That supposedly do AI to help you like to progress your training according to all the information you give it.
Right.
But what happens, and I've seen reviews online of some of these systems, is that like it'll give them their programming, and somebody goes like, it has me doing like a new 6 rep max on squats, and then 8 back offsets, and then a bajillion sets of deadlifts. And this person, like one thing is like, that could have come out of like seemingly nowhere.
Totally.
It progressed somewhat for the previous week, but it feels like a big jump.
Yeah.
And it's not like a nice smooth linear block, periodization or something where things kind of predictably go up and down.
Absolutely.
And so like they get this thing and it just like, that seems wrong.
Right.
I don't know what to do now,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the big takeaway for me, just over the course of our conversation here, has just been, you can trust the system and trust the AI, but there's always going to be a factor of you implementing that new data or drawing something out of that data and changing and adjusting programming for the better of your athletes. And we can't lose sight of that. And those types of tools are super beneficial.
Yeah, more so than like AI coming and replacing a lot of our jobs. Like, it's going to be something, these smart systems are going to be more and more integrated into different jobs. So jobs might change. You might have to consume data differently, or you might have to do your tasks differently.
Sure.
But it's still like for a while at least, there's going to be a human sitting on the other end making the decision.
No question.
That's been it for us today. Go to trainheroic.com, start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
Ooh. All right, now it's time for the Body by Boyle Online.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. We just posted the summer programs, so our members are enjoying those. Today we have on a member of the MBSC staff, Kevin Carr. He works as both a performance coach and a massage therapist there. One of the things, too, he's also the co-founder of Movement is Medicine, and they do massage and movement therapy there. He's also a co-founder at Certified Functional Strength Coach, and he travels the world teaching the CFSC classes, and now he's on going to a bunch of different workshops and seminars talking about other things, like 2 things that we're talking about today. And Kevin, first of all, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. Always happy to get on and talk with you.
All right. Well, yesterday we talked. We recorded your webinar for Body by Boyle Online called "Full Spectrum Rehab: A Client-centric Approach to Return to Play," and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about your upcoming lecture in Chicago for Perform Better, and you did one in Orlando. Brain trainer strategies for long-term cognitive health. So, let's start out though with yesterday's webinar, because I think it's important to kind of understand. It kind of reminds me of the stay in your lane idea, and then Charlie Weingroff and training equals rehab, and we always get confused, like should we refer out? And I think you're kind of covering a lot of bases here in this webinar and in this talk, what we're going to talk about today. Just like where do we draw that line? And can you just start out? I like the way you started out the webinar, traditional versus the client-centric rehab. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, in a lot of traditional rehabilitation models, it's, the client or patient comes seeking help for whatever they're dealing with, whether it's a chronic pain issue or an acute injury issue. And it's usually, the doctor dictating them orders, then the PT dictating them orders, and then the trainer dictating them orders. And it's everybody kind of directing their thoughts and their beliefs and their past experiences back to the client, and the client kind of being a passenger in the process, right? And then also in that instance, it's usually all of these different professionals working in their own silo, right? Not really a clear sense of communication and teamwork working together, where like the PT and trainer and doctor collaborate, and even bring the friends and the family collaborating as well, the people who are supporting that person in rehabilitation or training. Usually they're not connected, and that's really the traditional model that we see. And I don't think that lends itself to success long term for lots of clients. We want to see what I termed as more of a client-centric model, where the whole team is working together with their number one concern being the patient or the client and their wishes and their concerns, and getting feedback from them and letting them kind of drive the process. Yeah.
So my confusion with that statement, though, is, look, I understand what you're saying, because like I've had problems. Like I had a client, and we had to do a podcast on this, episode 59 with Charlie Weingroff, which ended up being amazing, because my client had shoulder surgery. She went to the doc and she was cleared, and then it's like, okay, you can go to physical therapy. And so, she's talking to the doc about stuff, and the therapist is obviously not involved. And then she went to the therapist, and then we had a million questions for the therapist. We sent him. I sent Betty off, and she basically had all these questions, and they answered all the questions. So we're like, cool. So I was completely following what they said. As soon as they cleared her to do everything, we started doing some med balls. That was one of the questions. Can we do med ball training? Throwing some med balls around. They said absolutely, totally cleared. We did some med balls. 2 sessions later, she's hurting, and I had to send her to Charlie Weingroff, and he kind of patched her up, fixed her up. We had some really good communication, and that's what led us to a podcast, because everything was amazing and she felt great, and we were able to do everything we had. That's number one. So yes, once you get that communication, but it's so hard, number one. And number two is the client's coming in there with all their biases too. Like, well, Kevin, listen, if we let the lunatics run the asylum, so elaborate a little bit more on what you mean specifically, like, because, look, they're going to read some magazines and be like, look, I know my knees can't go over my toes and whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. In fitness especially, I always say, like, for trainers and strength and conditioning coaches, fitness is like one of the only professions, I'm sure there's others, but that like your clients come in with some preconceived notion or experience in it, right? Like when you go to get your car fixed, they're like, you don't bring it and say, hey, when you work on my transmission, I want you to do it this way. This is what I read. It's good. Like you just trust the mechanic, right? But in fitness, everyone has some idea because it's in a magazine or TV or whatever, right? So yeah, they're going to come in with biases, just like professionals have biases. And I think what it starts with is just asking them the right questions so you can draw those out of them, because then you can start to maybe educate ones that might be, contraindicated to, what you might be practicing or what best practice is, right? So like I've definitely had people come in who said like, oh, my doctor said I can't lift weights. I shouldn't lift weights. It's going to be bad for me. And maybe and I'd have to ask them more questions. Well, tell me why they said that. Have you had any experiences with lifting weights? And then they can continue to elaborate on those things, and then looking for an opportunity then to provide education for them. And maybe it's starting with something that is really, really regressed. Like I remember actually Mike Boyle talking about like working with, rehabilitating like professional soccer players. Like they would be really scared to lift. They don't like lifting in the first place because they think it'll make them bulky, right? So maybe starting with, you got this like world-class level soccer player and you're starting with like a body weight squat to a box. And then maybe then after a few weeks of them getting comfortable so they're not sore, you add an 8-kilo bell. It's maybe just a slower path, but you're breaking down that barrier. So it just kind of, I guess, tells you, where they might have their biases, and then it gives you an opportunity to start to educate, right? And work from there.
Yeah, it's so true, because I love when I get the doctor said don't lift anything over 15 pounds, and I would be like, well, what does that mean? Like, where does that number come from? Like, why like, what, do you know where that came from? They're like, oh no, he just said, it's coming from like him not wanting to recommend anything, and like is worried about getting sued if they like pick something up and get hurt, right? It's like, it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly, and it's almost like you have to get to the point with the client where they can start to see those answers themselves and be like, okay, I guess 15 pounds isn't that heavy, right? And then all of a sudden, fast forward and you got someone, deadlifting, like a 28-kilo bell, or doing a goblet squat with like a 50-pound dumbbell, who was just scared to even, bend down and tie their shoes when they first came in the gym. And it's like you slowly just have to break those walls down, and some people get there quicker than others.
And it's not just regular clients. There are athletes, because they're taking this direction, and parents are, if it's a kid who's a teenager, parents are kind of watching over this and saying, hey, the doc said. So it's not just regular clients.
No, you have to start to educate. I mean, sometimes the athletes are worse because they're so emotionally tied to whatever it is they do as an activity or a sport. They identify themselves as a soccer player, football player, hockey player, whatever it is, that they're almost hypersensitive around their injury history or whatever their diagnosis was. Like, for instance, I've had a baseball player this whole winter that I was training, high school baseball player, and anything around his shoulder, he was originally, very hypersensitive about. He had a history of shoulder injuries. And I started to talk to him, and I said something along the lines of, like, it's really interesting how baseball, of all sports where you rely so much on shoulder strength, is the only sport where they don't want you to actually train the limb that you use the most.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me kind of funny. And, we started with, some push-ups, like way under what his capacity was, but just so he could see, like, oh, I did, 3 sets of 8 push-ups today, and my shoulder didn't fall off, and I was still able to pitch and do, throwing practice and things like that. And then slowly over time, started to build these things up. But yeah, they come in with biases just like a normal person would.
Absolutely. I want you to go over the biosocial psychological model that you were talking about, because I think it's important, and I really like it, but I do, not that I have a problem with it. I know what the problem is going to be, and I know what people are going to say. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't have time for that. Like, people come in for groups, blah blah blah. Go over this whole thing, because I think people are going to look for an excuse to get out of, because this is really thorough. What you talked about yesterday was really thorough.
Yeah. So the idea of the biopsychosocial model is that, there's a number of factors that can have an impact on pain and discomfort and sensation with your clients, right? And traditionally in the biomedical world, we've been so hyper focused on the bio piece, right? Stability, mobility, like all the key words you hear when you think about rehabilitation in physical therapy and strength conditioning, right? And all that stuff is important, and I'm not going to discount the value of the basic strength training and this philosophy we've always built. That stuff is hugely valuable. But we can all think of clients who, we probably done the right things with and said, I really think I'm doing the right thing. And they still might suffer from persistent pain and ongoing issues that seem like they're tied to, other things in their life. And these are the people that sometimes you might have termed as like problem clients, or, the people that might not have a successful experience with you. And then it's because we're forgetting the psycho and the social aspects that have an impact on pain. And there's plenty of research to show things like economic factors, social support, trauma in history, bad experience with strength training or rehabilitation in the past, a pathoanatomy like diagnosis from your doctor where they're saying, oh, you have like a terrible bulging disc, or you have bone on bone. All of these things can actually make pain sensation worse and lead to more persistent pain. So we want to talk to our clients about those things and develop a strong social support for them, like both within the clinic or in the gym, and help promote healing that way, not just through training. So like you had mentioned, people being like, oh, that's really hard. I don't have time. I have groups. I think the really good coaches and really good therapists do a lot of these things naturally, in that they ask questions and listen to their clients. They want to know more about their history. They ask open-ended questions. They support them in and out of the gym. They use thoughtful progression so that our clients see success. Like, all of these things are little things that add up, not just to support them physically, but also to support them psychologically, right?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes like really good coaches do these things naturally, and that's why they see success. And it's not necessarily just the physical changes, but how these people react psychologically to training.
Yeah, and I think, too, with the technology now, one of the things that I did at 5 Iron when I was, when I had the facility and I had new people, like I still train, but I don't really take new people. And what I would do is I would send them this questionnaire that they would fill out at home, because I didn't want them filmed. Like, if you ever gone to the doctor and filled something out, like, you're just dying to get to the doctor. You're like, I got to fill this out. Check, whatever. And you don't elaborate. So I would send it. I would say, hey, before you come in, send this in, because I want to look at it. So my first conversation, and all I did was kind of read it and go over, like, to pick out the red flags if I saw any injuries and ask some of the questions. And then obviously I wanted that information for later so I could, like, when I'm designing the program. And then I used it to make a conversation with them about their goals and about some of those things. I think we kind of, like, especially with the technology, you can get a Survey Monkey for free and just be like, send it to somebody and have them fill out all of these questions. So that's another piece. Like, how do we manage all of this?
Yeah, actually, I saw something really cool just this past weekend. I was down teaching a CFSC course at Beyond Strength Performance in Sterling, Virginia. It's Chris Merritt and Todd Bumgarner and their team down there. They do a really good job. And I was talking to them about this type of stuff, like how do you do client check-ins and how do you help manage all these other factors outside of the gym. And they have this really cool little handout that they give, and they do check-ins, and they also have an online thing that goes through like 8 different categories, right? So the categories, if I'm correct, were, like, do you have a commitment to something personal? Do you have goals outside the gym? Have you been consistent with your training and finishing your training program? Nutrition, like, are you nailing the things on our nutrition guide? And sleep, are you averaging 7 to 9 hours sleep a night? Are you active outside the gym? Do you do active self-care like mobility sessions? Do you create mental space and meditation, or find something that gives you enjoyment outside of work and outside of training? And then do you have connection support? And there's all these little questions after. And what they do is they self-rate themselves like 1 to 5, right? And on like a Survey Monkey. And it takes like 5 minutes. And then they can actually get like a graph back that shows them their progress. And then they can start to pick other things to work on, and they can talk about that. And I think sometimes just the act of asking the question and sending the questionnaire actually will make people feel better, just even if they don't subjectively score themselves better because they feel like they're supported, right? Just little things like Mike always says, like, you should be texting your clients every day, right? Like, hey, how you feeling today? Did you maybe try this extra homework, or like, hey, check out this article. Like, even those things to stay in touch with them. And like you said, using technology to do it, I think makes it a little more easy now. Keeps these people in the loop and keeps them feeling supported so that they can continue to progress.
Yeah, and you said something really important about what they're asking, and it was more about what are the other goals that you have in your life. So if right now, you have to know what other people are doing. If, like, there are people that cannot get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Like, they might be on a huge project at work and working 6 days. This might not be the time to be going heavy and to saying, like, you can get a strength goal. And Michael Hyatt actually calls that, he doesn't call them SMART goals, he calls them smarter, and the last R is relevant. And it has to be relevant to the season that you're in. So if, like, you're working a lot at work, like with an extra project, or if you're doing something that's going to be a conflict with another goal outside of work or outside of the gym, then it's really, those things have to be aligned. I like that they asked that.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. So I was sitting down with Scott and Damien at Movement Medicine. We were like building our own same little framework for how we can check in with our therapy clients. Because we have like an online intake, and we were saying, it's probably not as effective as we want, and we should really do a continual intake like that. So we got right to work on that this week, because I thought it was so good.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now let's expand on this, because I think it was Patrick Ward who had originally had kind of talked about some of the studies that were showing when everybody was talking about some of the questions that you should ask people. And what he was saying was, you can find all these things out, but there's 5 simple questions that you can ask them that have shown to have more efficacy than any of the other technology. Like just knowing where they're at, and hopefully, once they, hopefully they're going to answer as honestly as possible. But you had a slide yesterday called "Ask the Right Questions." Can you go over some of those?
Yeah. And this is something that I kind of helped and got an idea from like Mark Fisher and their team when I went to their seminar, and hearing Mark and all of them talk about, asking open-ended questions, right? Because like you were saying, when you go to the doctor's office or wherever and you fill out an intake, the number one thing you want to do is I need to get through this so I can go see the doctor. And this mindset flips where it's like, I need to please the doctor or please the therapist or please the trainer. So when you ask questions, lots of times you get these short answers or these yes, no's. They don't really elaborate. So I always try to practice what I learned from them, which was always asking a question that they can't just say yes or no to, make it open-ended. Like, tell me about your day today. They can't just say yes or no. They have to tell you about what went on. And then you can ask another open-ended question. So the first part is before the question specifically, I'd always try to ask something that can't just be a yes or no. And that can be a hard thing to do if you're used to always asking, yes or no, or questions where someone could answer in one word. But then, some of the questions I try to consistently ask, how would you rate your day? How stressful was it? And tell me about, what was a positive experience, what was a negative experience? Because lots of times they'll elaborate on, whatever was negative, right? And then you can kind of figure out what they're bringing into that session. Or tell me about some of your past experiences with training. So like we had said earlier, lots of times people will come in and have some sort of bias due to either a positive or negative training experience or therapy experience. And I want them to elaborate on that. And just continue to try to dig deeper into their history and let them start to talk. Because if you get people going, sometimes it's like a snowball down a hill. They'll just kind of keep rambling on, but you gotta kind of have to pull the string a little bit to get them talking.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that idea of open-ended questions, obviously. And I really like what you were talking about. I want to kind of transition this into pain a little bit. And because this is, everybody, we see has pain, right? And so it doesn't matter whether they're an athlete, like some kind of pain. And so we want to make sure that and we've had some different people on this podcast talking about all kinds of different, ways to talk about pain and nocebo and all kinds of stuff. But it's worth repeating this idea. Like one of the questions I remember yesterday, you were saying like, what have you found helpful in dealing with your pain? Because that's really important too, to find out like, cool, what are some things that I can do that they already know in their brain, because that's what we're going to transition to in the brain. In their brain, it's like that's what helps them.
Yeah, exactly. Because like if we're going to accept that pain is not just a local sensation, that it's a central sensation caused by a lot of things, both physical and psychological and socially driven, then we have to ask them questions that support those things. So by asking, hey, what are some things that have helped you? Those are some things that you might be able to work into the session for almost no other reason than the fact that it's going to make them feel like they're doing something that supports them and that it's good. Like for instance, I have one client who was like, hey, I feel much better when I foam roll this one spot, and I'm not really sure that it makes a big difference. Like they were like, hey, this area, if I roll my adductor, this area on my knee feels better. Maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't. But hey, if you're telling me that you like it, I have this one woman who really loves this one stretch that like normally I wouldn't program. It's not like it's potentially dangerous. It just seems somewhat ineffective, but she swears by it. So I say, okay, we're going to put that in, and then we're going to start to do all these other things that I think support the process. And if that helps someone create some buy-in, if they tell you like, hey, this is something I really like, maybe that's something you want to start to work into the program solely because it's going to make them believe in the process.
Yeah, and Nick Winkleman always talked about giving the client some autonomy to kind of, and you could kind of fake them out in terms of, hey, what would you rather do? The bike or the rower? Like, which one do you want to do today? And they feel better that they're picking, like, I hate the bike, let's go on the rower or whatever, And there is an element of, like you said, with some of those it's okay to throw in one of the exercises they like doing that maybe they've had success with in the past.
Yeah, and like if you give them autonomy, then they start to feel like they own the process a little bit, and it's not just you dictating everything that gets done. And then I feel like they take a little bit more ownership, and in the long run, that's really what you want.
Absolutely, and let's segue that into, it is so important. I do want to ask you some of the things that you don't want to talk about when it comes to pain. I think it's worth repeating that, we have talked about this in the past on this podcast, but with what you were saying in a webinar about like not saying bone on bone, not like really trying to stay away from that completely.
Yeah, I try to stay as far from like gross anatomical explanations and from what they would call like nocivic language that accentuates like whatever they think is physically going on with their symptoms, right? So yeah, the common thing to be like, oh, I was told my knee was bone on bone. And I know I like how Mike always jokes about saying how like, yeah, I mean, all bones are on bone. That's how a skeleton works. But when they say bone on bone, in their head, they're picturing these two bones grinding together. Yeah. And that helps. That actually makes the pain sensation worse. So they'll say, oh, my bad hip or my bad foot. I'm like, no, it's just the foot we're working on. It's not a bad one. It's just as good as the other one. We're just kind of working on some things. And I heard one guy say like, my back is crumbling. The chiropractor said my back is a total mess. Right. And then they just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. They begin believing that. So I always want to try to discourage that language. And I want to try to kind of stray away from like the idea of like they create this image of what's going on underneath their own skin. And I want to try to take kind of a little bit more of a holistic approach to explain it for them so that we don't enhance the pain that they probably already have.
Yeah, it's funny. I like strong first. They'll say, you never say this is my weak arm. You say, this is my strong arm. That's my stronger arm.
Yeah.
So I like that. And it's funny because I got diagnosed. I had a tear in one of my ankles, in my right ankle, and one of the tendons. And I was recommended surgery. And I'm like, oh, man, So I called Charlie Weingroff, and I said, hey, can you just look at this and can you help me out? He sent me to the hospital special surgery and like a famous surgeon. He was like, listen, I love to cut people up, but you don't need this. He's like, you can like in 6 months, if it's still the same, we can do surgery, but why don't you try physical therapy with Charlie first and go from there? And then I said, because Charlie costs more than the surgery. No, but you know what's funny is I was so happy that he said that because now I got like one of the top guys in the world telling me I don't need surgery. I literally limped in and I was skipping out. I was like so happy that I can't tell you how much better my ankle felt as soon as he said that. And then I was like, I haven't had pain. So right now I have problems with my shoulder, and there's no way I'm going to get an MRI because if someone's going to tell me, oh, you got a tear here. No, I'm getting some therapy and that's it. I don't even have a problem with my shoulder. So
yeah, that's perfect right there. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, you go and get an MRI, you're going to find something. And for the majority of surgeons, like they do surgery, right? So that's what they're going to look for. But like you get a guy like that helps you look beyond that, and then all of a sudden things start feeling a lot better. Just a few minutes later.
It's so true. That language is so important. We got to kind of make sure that we're not talking about that with our athletes, not saying like, how's the pain today? You just got to say, you do want to ask how you feeling, and then you want to turn around into a positive thing. Let's talk about the brain a little bit more. You're doing brain trainer strategies for long-term cognitive health. Talk to us give us an overview of this lecture and like why it's important for everyone to know.
Well, I got really interested in it after I did the Movement is Medicine lecture, which was a little bit more of like a full health talk a few years ago. But in the process, I did a lot of research about cognitive health, specifically dementia, Alzheimer's, and depression, and how those things are affected by physical activity and exercise, nutrition, all these things that we have at our disposal as strength and conditioning coaches and personal trainers. And it was pretty unbelievable to see all the research that is out there and how much we have an impact. And I was, kind of touched personally by this just because my grandfather suffered and passed away from vascular dementia a couple of years ago. So it was something I took a lot of interest in personally. And then I looked around and you don't really see that it being marketed. I think more recently you've seen more and more like news articles and things like that, where you're starting to see people point towards how exercise helps with depression or exercise helps with dementia, but you don't see it marketed and discussed as much. And kind of working in with my clientele, both athletes who are eventually going to be older, like God willing, they're going to age and live a normal life at some point, and the general population who we see every day, I see it help them and they comment how it helps them. And so it's something that I became passionate about. And in my lecture, I just try to highlight all of the tools that we have at our disposal as trainers to really help people's long-term health outcomes. And it's a lot of it's stuff that, we do every single day, but we might not necessarily highlight to the client to draw their attention and importance into what we do.
So what is it that we can do or that we should be doing? I mean, because if like an athlete might say to you, Kev, look, I'm coming in 4 days a week and I play twice. Like, what do you want? What do you want from me? Like, what else can I do? Right?
Yeah. And like, so for someone who's an active athlete, who's probably already lifting weights and probably already aerobically fit, lots of the things that you're going to look at are the outside factors, right? So, how do they manage stress? We know that stress is a killer on the brain, specifically the hippocampus, which is the area that's usually most affected in Alzheimer's and dementia. And if you look at, I know Robert Sapolsky highlights some of this research in Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and there's a bunch of research along with that, that like when they stress chimps, and now they're starting to see when they stress people, they'll actually see observed shrinking of the hippocampus. And that's the area that is directly related to Alzheimer's disease. And then also, when you have people who don't get consistent sleep, another thing that a lot of athletes struggle with. And we always think about how it relates to their performance on the field and injury risk, and that's important. But even people who have small reductions in REM and deep sleep every single night have at much higher risk for dementia and depression and anxiety and all these other things. And those are things that athletes deal with. So I guess it just kind of drives home the point for athletes and people who are already active, how important all these other factors are that sometimes, they don't normally focus on as much as we want. And maybe it's an easy way to sell them on a long-term effect, but it's just more education and more research to support that.
Yeah, and it's hard with the kids. I remember I have an advertising degree, and I remember we had to do an ad for, I think Drunk Driving it was, and everybody they wanted to know what's the message that we want to talk about, and everybody was kind of saying, show them the pictures of somebody crashing and all that. I was like, the kids don't care. They think they're invincible. Tell them, show them that they're not going to be driving. They're going to get their license taken away. That's more. They're not worried, and they're not dying. They're not worried about that. So. And I think you got to keep educating them. But it's funny because Carlos Reda just posted something today on images, an EEG image of a neuroelectrical brain activity after 20 minutes of sitting. And the blue area that they shows a dip in neural resources devoted to focus. And then the same brain after 20 minutes of doing some exercise indicated more red, which indicated heightened attention and faster information processing. So it just goes to show you, even if we're saying how important a warm-up is for to play a sport, right? I mean, You're going to have more focus. You're going to be, you're going to be ready for that sport. That's kind of the license idea. Hey, this is going to help you right now, but even though we're sneaking it in for long-term health.
Yeah, and really good book for people out there to look up is Smart Moves by Carla Hannaford. And what she does is she works with children and helps them with education, usually kids who might have learning disabilities, and they use movement and exercise to enhance that. And she talks about that exact thing, about how dynamic movements, specifically things like crawling, things where we have to cross the midline and rotate. So, if you think about what we do in the gym, ladder drills, skipping, you have to coordinate right side, left side. Things like karaoke, shuffling, things where we have to move in different planes rather than just being linear and sagittal, have been shown to help decision-making and focus and executive function. So if you think about how that relates to sport, you're right. It keeps them sharper, keeps us more focused. And then I always say about with workouts, the old warm-up back in the day, a lot of people would be like, oh, I go do the treadmill or I hop on the elliptical for 5 minutes, right? And then we lift weights or then we go to our sport or whatever. And I think you leave so much on the table because we discount the value of warm-ups. I think warm-ups are so valuable for so many reasons outside of just getting your body temperature up. They really help your nervous system fire sharper. They help your brain fire sharper. So we don't want to leave those things on the table.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So you've been at MBSC for a while now. So, I mean, I think one of the important things here, too, is I think our responsibility as strength coaches, as personal trainers for athletes, we really need to focus on making this an enjoyable experience, too, because what happens when they stop playing high school football or hockey or college football or college hockey? And we want them to continue that lifestyle. We want them to enjoy the gym. We don't want them to just think of the gym as only performance related.
Yeah, exactly. Like really, when I think about working with these kids, I have a realization that like the majority of the kids that we work with at MBSC, very few might even play college sports, much less professional sports, right?
Yeah.
They're recreational high school athletes. And I go back to that John Ehrman book, Inside Out Coaching, where he says, like, if you spend all your time focusing just on athletic performance, you really miss the boat, man, what you're doing. We're trying to build better adults, and better adults also just means people who have better health habits. So if you make it an enjoyable experience, like I really feel like I've done a successful job when I have a kid that's like all done with college or all done with high school. And then I see them like come into the adult group and they just keep, that's the best. And like, that makes me feel like, okay, we did a really good job, that they value this. Or even cooler, like maybe they want to be an intern, or maybe they want to like be a strength and conditioning coach or personal trainer. And I think, okay, that's the ultimate success, more so than them like winning a championship. That stuff's good, but they have to live a long, healthy life after that.
It's that was my question, is like, how much do you see these athletes kind of post quote unquote athletic career?
Yeah, we do. And that's like Mike, even he has a picture in one of his presentations of like the 3-generation families that we have. We have a lot of 2-generation families, and we have 3-generation families. And a lot of those people like were athletes that became adults, and now their kids are in the athlete groups, and so on and so forth. And that's the type of change you want to kind of make in your immediate community. And then for those that might not come to us, like I had a lot of people being like, hey, can you coach me online or send me a program, or maybe direct me to somewhere I can train now that I don't live in the Boston area. And that is, I want to try to get that happening as frequently as possible.
Yeah. Talk to me about, like, I know I've heard, stories about, not stories, but like research on if somebody quits smoking, they can get their lungs back, right? And they can rebuild, the body's amazing. It'll kind of rebuild itself, right? Talk to me about, if I'm 52, not saying I'm 52, but if I was, I thought I saw a TED Talk. I think I was telling you about this yesterday, where she was talking about that. Like, sleep is the number one problem. Is like if you don't get sleep, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And I like in my 20s and kind of 30s, I really didn't get. I was in the bar business, and my sleep was really bad. And so obviously I built up something there. Is there any research on kind of being able to kind of undo all the bad stuff that you did in the brain?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with the sleep research is, like they said, it's like a long night's sleep the next day doesn't make up for the lost sleep the day before. But the cleaning process, when you sleep, your brain essentially flushes a lot, right? If you get into deep sleep, it helps. The blood flow goes up. They track what's going on in your brain, you see an increase in blood flow. And what happens is you essentially flush out things like amyloid plaque and all this stuff. So then consistently getting sleep will help you at least clean up some of the damage. You might not catch up on your energy and some of these other things, but you can start to kind of jump forward. When you look at the exercise research, what's interesting is for a long time, we always just assumed, doctors and medical community would assume, that as you got older, you lost brain mass, right? And that when you got older, it's normal to forget things, right? The whole thing like, oh, we're just getting old, right? And they looked at the data, they said, your brain shrinks once you start to get, into the second half of life. But recently they did some studies where they used fMRI to measure brain mass. And then what they did is they took a bunch of men who were like in their second half of life, post 50, who had tested for mild cognitive impairment. So not quite dementia, but they were slowing down, forgetting things, and they had shown that they had actually lost brain mass. And they had put them through some executive functioning tests before and memory tests, and then they had them do like a 12-week exercise program where it's just aerobic training, like 3 days a week. I think it was fairly low intensity, but it was aerobically stressful. and then they measured brain mass, and they actually grew brain cells back. They actually had more brain volume. So that brain actually grew from the aerobic training, and they also showed improvements on like the memory and executive function tasks. And so they were scoring better for these mild cognitive impairment tests. So you can start to repair the damage. But obviously the research kind of shows that the sooner you start habits of, managing your sleep, managing stress, and exercising consistently, then obviously the bigger gains and regains we can start to make when it comes to their health.
Yeah, in that book, Brain Rules by John Medina, like one of the first things he talks about, he has like these 10 rules. And John Medina is a brain scientist. Like he was like, he doesn't take anything lightly. Everything had to be like double-blind studies and all that crap. And he was saying, number one thing that he mentions is exercise. And he points to Jack LaLanne, and he goes, the impressive thing about Jack LaLanne wasn't that of it, like the way his body looked at 98, but was when you spoke to him, how alert he was, how with it he really was. When you talked to him, he was so sharp. And that's what John Medina was talking about in Brain Rules, was like, this is the reason why you want to exercise.
Yeah, and for so long we had this like dualism, like that the brain and body were separate, right? And you can't separate the two. And when I think about my own clients, and I have a lot of clients who are 60 plus, some that are in their mid 70s, and I'll tell you, the ones that have been coming consistently, they're sharp, and they have an active lifestyle outside of me. I'm not saying I'm the reason they're sharp. Like, these are people that not only they see me 2 or 3 days a week, but they go walking and hiking in the woods. They participate in new activities. Like, I have a couple in their 70s that outside of the 2 days that they see me, she's in a swimming club. He's in like what they call a power walking club. He's in his mid 70s. He goes power walking with these other guys around his neighborhood. And then they're also taking watercolor classes. They're learning Italian. So they continue to challenge themselves. I think it's exercise, obviously hugely important, but it's also, enough stress from positive activity that it creates a continual reason for the brain to grow and adapt. So part of like being a really good coach, I think, is encouraging your clients to do things outside the gym, like going back to the questionnaire where we talked about for people in pain. Like, what other things do you do outside the gym? Do you have clubs? Are you learning something? You're pursuing something? Because that's kind of what keeps you sharp as you age and helps you, psychologically stay balanced,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I, on that same TED Talk, she was talking about the fact that, look, you can't do the crossword every day and think that's your brain working, because that's recalling, things. So you have to learn something. Like, you have to, like you said, you have to take Italian. You have to start new things. You have to develop those new synapses, right, that are going to help rework the brain. Kev, one last question. Is it like, let's call it brain confusion, is it like muscle confusion? Where, do we have to kind of almost like, does there have to be some kind of progressive resistance, or, you know what I mean? Like, is it just, can the walks be good enough? Like, for example, if I walk my dog every day 2 miles, it might not help me lose weight, but is that work on the brain, is the benefits of the brain, is that still okay, or does there have to be some kind of new piece of exercise that that's progressive, that's going to help the brain because my body's used to walking that 2 miles? Yeah.
I mean, I think that like the lower intensity activities, at the very least, those promote increased blood flow, and it seems like blood perfusion and just low level aerobic work will help to maintain qualities. But I do think that in all aspects, both whether it's resistance training, aerobic health, or like we said, activities, like you said, doing more than just a crossword, we need to continue stressing people to grow, because I think generally biology, like in physiology, always works by adaptation, right? You have to continue stress to get some sort of change. So, I mean, even if that means like for instance, my older couple, like now, they can crush the ladder drills. Like the ladder drills were the first thing that I did to be like, okay, we got to start to challenge them. That's like old hat for them. They do them. They have a ladder at home, actually. So now like we're doing, backpedaling and karaoke and skipping and shuffling, and I'm giving them more advanced med ball drills, baby steps. It's taken a while to get here. But given from where they were when they came in, it's a lot different, right? So I do think you need to continue stressing them. It's just probably depending on who they are and where they're at, you just at a different rate,
Very cool. Well, I'll remind everybody, two things we talked about today was the webinar Kevin did on bodybyboyleonline.com. Now, it's full spectrum rehab, a client-centric approach to return to play. And if you are in the Chicago neighborhood at the Perform Better Summit, he's doing brain trainer strategies for long-term cognitive health, which he'll obviously expand on this. Kevin, thanks for coming on and doing this. Really appreciate you kind of going over two of these really super important topics.
Thank you for having me. Always happy to talk about it.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 257 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out 3 days just to buck. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Parr and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now at Perform Better, they got free shipping on orders over $59. Also, Summit season is here. Come see me in Providence in August 1st to the 4th. You can check out more at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Kevin Carr for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Head over to Train Heroic and start your free 14-day trial. Let them know Anthony sent you. Save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. Alan Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Jenna Gourlay and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name's Anthony Renna. Go to continuefit.com to get all of my resources. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.